or you have a question, you want to take the floor, you can use the Q&A or post your question in the chat. We shall have a look at it. Then also, I just wanted to thank the organizers of this session, governance, and I just wanted to thank the organizers of this section for the wonderful deliberation we're yet to have. Yeah, thank you.
And just to the IGF volunteers, we are waiting for one more panelist, and we have a backup strategy, but Daniel Anaros is be the first speaker. If he hasn't come in yet, we'll have Claire speak first, and we'll wait for him.
Right. It's all right. When you're ready, you can begin. It's fine.
And we can communicate with one another through the chat. And
Yeah, sure.
8 panelists only, yeah? And then.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, hello, please can the caption now confirm whether it's available?
Yes, and the captioner is available. You can do the needful and grant the rights.
Great.
Yeah.
I have a let's see, share screen. Yeah, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Have to go. So there we are. So no, nobody has slides.
I have slides, Lee.
Oh, good. Okay. So somebody has slides. That makes for variety. All right. Do you want to try share? I mean, we haven't started yet, right? Or we have?
It's 33.
Yeah, I know it's 33. I was just waiting a second.
I just wanted to let you know, Lee, that we are already live on YouTube streaming.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let me start and introduce our panel. And to welcome everybody to the panel on the session, workshop session on governance and business models for inclusive development. Clearly from the title, you can see that we have 2 themes. We have a theme of inclusiveness, and here I'm looking at it in the sense, being from the World Trade Organization, of doing business by populations and communities that we would like to see more included in the digital economy. And governance now, and I'm taking governance for this panel in the broadest possible sense. I mean, there is probably a narrower sense of internet governance, specifically in terms of how the internet functions. I'm looking at it more in terms of all the different actors of governance. And we would then be looking at the national level of government activities, measures that relate to the digital economy. And obviously we have myself from the WTO, and we have a small part in what some people might refer to as internet governance at the multilateral level for the digital economy and e-commerce in all its forms. And we have somebody from UNCTAD as well, who is doing quite a lot of very interesting work we will hear about. So we're really trying to take these intertwined topics and try to make them work together. And we would want to come up with what is it that the private sector is accomplishing. At the same time, what are its challenges to doing more business, gaining more value from the digital economy, and what are in fact some of the government and other kinds of governance issues that can make it easier for, say, small and medium enterprises to participate in the digital economy productively. And I think that we have a very interesting panel here. I would like to sort of introduce them as I give them the floor, because you can see from the website who we have. And I must also say we have Agata Ferreira with us and Kian Kasagari with us also as facilitators, and actually we work together very much to organize this panel, and they will be helping us out and collecting the questions that any participants wish to put in the Q&A section. Feel free, people who are attending, to use the Q&A to pose questions. If we have time at the end, we'll take some actual physical questions, virtual physical questions, so that you can participate. And I will be asking at the very end my panelists to mention if they have any recommendations of what might be done by the private sector or the public sector or any other stakeholders to improve the situation for inclusiveness in the digital economy. And if any in the audience have any ideas on recommendations, we would also take those. So let me start, and we have one panelist who we're looking for. So let me start. We would talk about the business perspective on having to do both with connectivity and business models in terms of digital participation. And I would like to start with Claire Sibthorpe, who is the head of Connected Women of the, oh my goodness. What is your subdivision, Claire?
I'm a head of Connected Women and Connect Society and Assistive Tech at GSMA. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you have another division there. So I would like to give you the floor to talk about the very interesting work that GSMA has been doing in this area. Thank you.
Great, thanks, and it's great to be here. So when we look at this sort of digital economy and inclusive business models, I think what we need to do is look at who's not connected and why they're not connected and what can be done. Because obviously, if we're looking at digital business models, if you're going to reach people, they need to be connected, but also for those entrepreneurs and those businesses who are using online. I think COVID has highlighted, just the critical importance of digital inclusion. If you think about women entrepreneurs and other people who rely on the internet for their livelihoods, and especially now with lockdowns and everything else, really turning to it, if we think about it, inclusive business models, we need to think about those issues. So I'm going to talk about mobile specifically because it's essentially an essential enabler. It's the primary way that most people access the internet, and so it's important when we talk about inclusive digital models. So obviously, there's been a lot of work strides in terms of getting people connected, and driving that inclusion. But almost half the world's population use mobile internet, but there's still a gap. So if we're talking about inclusive business models, we need to reach those who are not currently online. And to understand that issue, we sort of think about it in two ways. At GSMA, we think about it in terms of like, what is the coverage gap? So those who don't have the basic connectivity, who are living outside of areas covered with mobile broadband networks, and that's just under 600 million people. They're predominantly rural areas where infrastructure deployment can be twice as expensive and revenues 10 times lower. But we also look at it, the usage gap, in terms thinking about people who live within coverage areas who are not using it. And that is a lot bigger. And that is an area also where a lot of work can be done to address inclusive business models. So there's approximately 3.4 billion people who live within areas covered by a mobile broadband network, but are not using it. They're not able to use it. So that usage gap is 6 times as higher. And the reality is that those who are not connected and not included are predominantly disproportionately rural, female, illiterate, older, and persons with disabilities. So if you think about gender and specifically, for example, there's a gender gap of women are 20% less likely than men to use the internet in low middle income countries. So that's a huge portion of the population, despite the fact that so many women entrepreneurs and medium micro enterprises, are very female dominated, and then simply don't have the ability to access and use digital services. So if we're thinking about how do we reach these and how do we enable the segment, we need to think about what's causing, what are the barriers that these groups are facing. So as I mentioned, one is around access. So there's a coverage gap, but there's other access issues that are at play. People lack access to formal IDs. They might struggle with the usability of some of the services and handsets. But I also mentioned that the usage gap is 6 times as big. So affordability is a key barrier. And if we look at our data, where we've done sort of nationally representative surveys to understand why people are not accessing and using digital services, handset affordability comes as the key barrier to owning a mobile phone, and particularly smartphone, which is critical in the business space. And then even those who have a handset and are aware of the opportunities in the internet, digital skills is amongst that population. Digital skills is the biggest barrier. So this knowledge and skills of how to use it, and the ability to use these services and get online. Other key issues that need to be considered are around safety and security. That's emerged in recent years as a barrier. Includes things like harassment, data privacy, and also ensuring there's relevant content and services, that they're relevant and meet the needs. And if you think about things also, other factors outside of those barriers, it's important we don't forget things like social norms and structural inequalities, things between men and women, for example. We recently analyzed a few years of data, and we looked at whether if women in low and middle income countries had the same levels of education, income, literacy, and employment as men, there would still be a gender gap. So it shows that issues that are much harder to measure, issues around discrimination and social norms, are at play, which is causing key barriers for example, for women to be able to participate. So I guess to achieve some of these sustainable business models and inclusive approaches, we need to that improve the livelihoods of all communities. We need to consider and address as far as possible these barriers. And if we don't, then they will have the potential to reinforce or exacerbate some of these existing inequalities. So these are some of the factors that really need to be considered when looking at the digital space and inclusive business models. What we also know is that some of these issues, they vary quite a lot between depending on where you are. So any approach needs to be grounded in an understanding of the local context, to understand the specific needs and barriers of that context and the groups that you're looking at. It needs to explicitly consider inclusion in the policy and strategies that are being developed without a specific explicit focus, for example, on gender or some of these inclusive issues. It doesn't happen by default. It needs a targeted action. And then you need to take targeted action to try and ensure that that you are enabling this sort of inclusion that we all sort of want and hope to achieve. So I guess those are the comments that I wanted to make on this. So I'll hand back to you, Lee.
Lee, you muted.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
clicking everything. Okay, thank you very much, Claire. And I think that that's incredibly important work, because the work we're doing at the WTO on small and medium enterprises, our understanding is the majority of them are actually women run. So they can't be forgotten if we want people to be more engaged in the economy. So let me move now to Daniel Anaros. He is the PDG, or in English, we would probably call that CEO of Manobi Africa in Senegal. And he has been working extremely hard for a very long time with micro enterprises, I would often say. And I think he has some very interesting stories to share with us. So Danielle, I will give you the floor now.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I can speak French or English. I mean, it's a multilingual discussion, but we are in a very particular situation. Probably everybody knows that with the COVID, and we have to look at the opportunities that we can have thanks to the extension of the reach of internet, of the quality of internet to on our population here in Africa. On our side, we are focused on two major areas for, I would say, economic and social development in Africa, which are agriculture. Everybody knows that almost 70% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa depends to the agricultural performance, and it's not so good today. Africa continues to import more of his agricultural products. Recently, I had a talk with some people working on the rice value chain, and we were talking about almost $5 billion imported every year on rice, only with rice. And probably in the next 20 years, recently the head of the African Development Bank mentioned that we will import almost 100 and 150 billion of dollars will be imported by Africa. Even we know that Africa has the capacity and the potential to produce. So we do see, and the second sector I'm talking about is the water sector, in which we are involved too, busy to use technology to provide and develop access to drinkable water, access to the million of people, 100 million of people who don't have access to water currently in Africa. The point is that during many years, we saw that it is important to develop the channels to extend the internet performance and capacity to reach everyone, and then based on that, we will have access to the service that we are looking for. And I think that right now we have to think a little bit more differently in Africa, and we are acting that way, which is to say, okay, based on what we have already available, the technology we have, the communication channels which are available wherever you are living, which kind of solution, business services, which can be provided, particularly to the small players, also small actors, small and medium enterprise, into any single value chain. And the interesting point is that when we go through this specific value chain, it's much more easier to develop proper business model, which and combined with significant impacts on the well-being of population. Currently, for instance, in Senegal, but also in other countries where we are involved, we are combining the expertise of the value chains with digital technology as health observation, mobile internet, IoT, artificial intelligence, to organize and de-risk inclusive value chain system involving smaller farmers contracted with larger agribusiness players. And we make that ecosystem attractive for banks so that smaller farmers who currently don't have access to credit, most of them don't have access to credit today, almost 80% of them, then we make them attractive for banks, we make them attractive for insurance companies, we make them attractive for input suppliers. And you can understand that to reach these people, some of them are living in very remote areas, to register the farmers, connecting into a contracted-based agricultural systems requires certain number of technology, also the availability of communication channels. It could be SMS, it could be 3G, it could be 4G, it could be whatever you want. But the most important thing is, can we develop this solution which will improve the productivity of the farmers? Can we improve the quality of the product that these farmers will deliver to the let's say the industry or the processor who will transform this product? Could we optimize the distribution channels of the input suppliers and the certified suppliers to these farmers? Can we provide the insurance companies solutions which help them to decouple their insured risk, their covered risk regarding the other risks due to farmer malpractices, for instance? Could we optimize the extension service qualities so that every farmer can adopt the best practices? That's the kind of questions, if you are able to respond to, using internet is important to do that, but if you can respond and create an added value, then you can figure out what could be the new business model which will sustain the development of the infrastructure. So my point is that right now, and I will conclude on that, and I can give other examples in the water sector as well. Currently, we are guiding a $600 million project in Benin, because the president of Benin just decided that every single rural household must have access to water through a tap in his house connected to the water pipe system. So he decided that we will not make boreholes and these small things, but big water pipe systems with large tanks. But if we do that, you say, okay, now we need to monitor the system, and that we need to be sure that every single system is working efficiently. So engaging into structuring, orchestrating these value chains, I would say creates added value and allows you more easily to define the business models that you can implement for us to support the development of internet and to create in the same time added value for the beneficiaries. So that's my point, and I think it's the opportunities that the COVID push us to consider. We have to develop the short circuit distribution. We have the supply chains. We have to involve our population, not only the top players, but also the smaller players, the small ones into the chain. So that we have a chain where we have transparent, honorable transactions, inclusive situation. We reduce friction between the players. And I think that the opportunity we have today, and that's a way that through which I do think we can address the issue of connectivity and also the issue of affordability of this technology and of this internet particularly. Thank you very much. I leave it right now to you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Danielle. The other thing I had a question for you. I know that you've engaged a lot of people and smallholders with technologies. What are some of the kind of technologies you have worked with people on in particular? Some. When I first met you,
you can see this. These IoTs these systems are rain gauges that we just developed a few months ago. It's a rescribable rain gauge costing something around $50, which can be installed by any farmer. It's a very small amount compared to the cost of production of 1 hectare. And with this rain gauge, we connected it to. We use the rain gauge information, the rain information which is collected by this rain gauge and transmitted to a platform to provide advices to the farmers, as for instance, optimal sowing dates, which is particularly important to know in our areas in sub-Saharan areas, and particularly in Sahelian areas where we only have 3 months of rains and we have to optimize the sowing date. So that's one of the things that we recently developed. That's all to the farmers. Another one is health observation. So we just completed a program with the support of the European Commission. It's an H2020 program, which is called Madeira, and in which we are using health observation to optimize the advices to the farmers, to optimize their practices on the ground. The good thing is that the things we develop in Africa right now, we started to have some clients also in Europe. So it's very funny to see that the technologies that, like this one we are using right now, we develop in Africa for Africa. We have we found clients in Europe using this technology. So we have hundreds of beginners in the south end of France, which are using our platform too. So again, the point is not too much the technology, but more or less the added values that you will bring to your customer using these solutions, combining the expertise, as I say, the expertise, the digital mastering, but also a certain proximal presence, which is very important in Africa, particularly where most of the farmers and small and medium enterprise don't have the background of the digital environment, the digital ecosystem that we can have in Europe. So these are some examples that we are using. We're also using artificial intelligence to
Incredible.
optimize the manipulation of farmers. So we have a combination of technologies that we are using for the farmers, with the farmers.
Thank you, Daniel. I've known you for a long time, and your work is always fascinating. And I'd like to introduce now Cici de la Pena. She is working as the manager of Mexico and Central America, as well as manager for regional digital trade in an organization called Ally. And I think I'm really looking forward to hearing from her as well. Let me give you the floor now, Cici.
Hi, Lee. Thank you very much. And it is a pleasure to be with you here discussing how we can encourage the development of business in this digital environment. Something I would like to remark, and probably from what our previous panelists have said in terms about connectivity and what are the key components that may be able to promote the development and inclusiveness of business for all the small enterprises. Claire mentioned something about connectivity and all the components that need to be improved or put forward in order to have more inclusiveness within the business. From our point of view, and first of all, I would like to emphasize that ALI is the Latin American Internet Association, which puts together digital companies such as Facebook, Google, Amazon, Mercado Libre, Twitter, all the major digital companies that work across the Latin American region. Obviously, we are encouraging to have more digital companies to be involved in ALI. We basically promote and talk to governments and to relevant key actors, to promote public policy for internet in order to promote digital economy across the region. And coming back to what Claire have said before, we have identified that in order for us to have a more inclusive digital economy in the Latin American region, we highlight connectivity and all the issues that Claire identify, which haven't really been resolved in the region, in the Latin American region, and that's a major barrier. But after that, we also find out that digital skills represent a basic or a major challenge for people and entrepreneurs in the region. And apart from that, we also see this challenging regulatory framework. We know that digital economy is about an economy that doesn't have geographical barriers, and therefore we have seen in the region a breakdown of regulatory frameworks that the only thing that are promoting is this bridge or this breakdown of how businesses can work across countries and can interact, and things like data flow or things like internet service provider responsibilities, or things like location of data sets, data centers, that sometimes some governments which are not really having these basic principles homogenized or across basic principles across the whole region, that are basically facing or putting a very high barrier for the small entrepreneurs. This is particularly important because all or most of the regulations are always focused or developed for these big companies, but the ones who really suffer the impact of these very strict regulatory frameworks are the small entrepreneurs, and that's basically stopping them for getting into the digital economy and the inclusiveness within the digital sector. In this sense, we also see a lack of a national digital strategy point of view for many countries across the Latin American region. It seems that countries have not really focused on how to identify where they want to go in terms of digital development in their countries. And apart from that, as I said before, the digital economy is not anymore a geographical barrier, or is not limited by geographical barriers. So it should be also in accordance to what across the region wants to achieve. So this digital vision of the region and then digital vision of the at a national level, it really represents a barrier for small enterprises and small businesses. That was something I wanted to emphasize from what our previous panelist says. And I think these are very, very big challenges that we need to put across in order for us to develop the digital economy across the Latin American region. We need to identify how we can put this discussion forward, not only with the people that are always in the discussion, which are the people in the technology and information sector. We need to bring up to the conversation to all sectors, in the finance sector, health sector, education sector, which sometimes are not really involved on what are the challenges of implementing regulatory frameworks that are not really homogenized or really in accordance to what a national level and at a regional level we want to achieve in a digital environment. That's basically what I wanted to highlight. I think I may have exceeded my time, but I would like to say that connectivity, digital skills, a set of principles across the region, a regulatory framework, and a national digital and regional digital strategy is essential to develop these business enterprises.
In fact, Cici, you were exactly on time, and we'll move on to our other two panelists from the public sector for any comments they might have about the business landscape and what they're seeing from their perspective. Thank you very much, Cici. It sounds like it's quite a challenge. Let me first call on Mercy Wanjau, who is the Director General of the Communications Authority of Kenya. And she has a lot of experience working on all aspects of ICT, which, we keep changing our terminology. Now we would say that Mercy deals with the digital world. And so from that perspective, I'd like to hear more about what she's seeing as a regulator in terms of the business activity in that relates to her world.
Thank you very much, Lee, and to the presenters in the business panel. on the issues that they have raised. Yesterday, I spent the whole day, about 6 hours from Nairobi, the capital city, to go and launch some base stations that opened up communities to the experience of voice and data for the first time. I can only say it was a very heartwarming activity to see the kind of things they had already started doing within 3 months of receiving this signal. It really brings home the point that CC is making about policy and regulatory requirements, and the question whether what are the barriers that these requirements present. And from a regulator's perspective, the comment I would wish to make to this situation is the need to be open-minded to the possible development of new business models that are likely to thrive within this kind of new and emerging situations, and the need to ensure that policy and regulatory frameworks do not present a barrier. Indeed, when you're talking about communities like women, small and medium enterprises, the models for business that we have been used to before might not be applicable or might need to be rejigged in this new environment, and the need for policy and regulatory structures to be supportive, enabling, to be sensitive, and perhaps even sensible to accommodate the new and emerging opportunities that are arising. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mercy. I mean, that was a perfect story about combining the businesses and the technology and what people can do. Let me turn now to Rishabh Brattury, who is a lawyer who I've worked with over many years in his different capacities, but at the moment he's an expert on e-commerce and trade, working with the ICT policy section of UNCTAD. Rishabh?
Good afternoon, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here and speak on this important topic. The other panelists have raised some valuable and noteworthy points on this particular issue. There are 3 things that I will be speaking about. The first of which is e-commerce skills. Now, it is noted that the lack of e-commerce business skills has been identified as a major constraint to the sector's development. And although there are business incubators and accelerators exist to address this issue, the awareness of their existence appears to be limited across many countries. Now, business incubators can be established to provide startups like MSMEs for essentially 2 things. The first is to ensure the right skills are provided for success and viability of the company. And the second is to ensure that funding is appropriately granted to develop their business. Now, this could be done by channeling funds through perhaps startup competitions, as is currently being done in Myanmar. That could be a good model to be used. The second issue is with regard to affordability. Affordability is a great challenge for MSMEs and also women entrepreneurs. For example, the price of internet and telecommunications services are unaffordable in many LDCs and also developing economies. There is also a need for better infrastructure, as well as development of business-friendly models to lower the service delivery of costs so that the tariffs can be aligned in an affordable manner. Another challenge with regard to affordability is the price of IT and electricity supplies, and of course, the access to electricity itself. And the third issue is with regard to regulation. From the point of view of regulation, it would be important to appropriately and clearly disseminate rules and regulations on e-commerce, but also the internet. Also, these regulations should be drafted in a manner that are clear, concise, and easy to understand. The regulations should also aim to provide legal coverage to innovative ways of business interactions. This may, for example, in the context of fintech, be by way of introducing regulatory sandboxes. However, lawmakers should ensure that the manner in which these laws are being formulated are not harmful to third parties or in contrary to public interest.
Thank you, Rishabh. that pretty much concludes round one, but I think we have one question here that is come from the question box. There haven't been too many, but I had promised to give Kian the floor to go over these. Kian?
Surely, thank you. So we have a question for Danielle from Arthur, and the question is related to the power supply and the use of electric digital devices in remote rural places. It seems that the power supply is an issue to use those electric devices. And Arthur is asking you, Daniel, if you can give your views on how to deal with the power supply issues in Africa to facilitate the use of electric digital devices in remote rural areas.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that I observe that there is a tremendous effort right now conducted to try to fill the gap about the electricity concerning access to electricity of people in Africa. Even we are far beyond what we far away of the objective, but we see several technologies, the grid, solar energy, and a lot of companies looking for a lot of small and medium companies developing or showing solar connectivity, solar energy access to rural population. I think that this is one of the value chain which certainly requires some development, and which offers without any doubt opportunities to develop appropriate good business model and efficient business models. Particularly, and I suspect that the question was asked because I don't remember the name. Arthur probably has an idea of what he wants to offer to this particular sector. But yes, this is a big issue. I think the gap is important. Even we see a lot of development. It's more or less the same than in the water sector, and I do think that this is one of the components which is causing a lot of problems in terms of developing the connectivity in Africa. We need this sector being developed more actively in our continent for sure.
Thank you, Danielle. We'll start the part two of our panel now with the public sector people. And as I said, internet governance has very many different levels and different actors. And I'll start with the national level with Merci Wanjiao, again, who I've already introduced, and talking much more now about her regulatory work since we have finished with the private sector part. Thank you, Merci.
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you for this opportunity to put in some words for quality and regulatory initiatives to promote inclusion with a particular focus on women and SMEs. And I'd like to bring it out through certain regulatory tools. First, the National Broadband Strategy. We do have a strategy that was captured from 2018 to 2023, setting a roadmap on how broadband could be applied for opportunity and for economic growth. And as part of that strategy, it did identify that there would be need for special initiatives that would promote digital literacy and access to devices for persons living with disabilities, initiatives for women, and affirmative action programs. This is because we do recognize the need for affordable and quality broadband services and platforms that would exist to enable businesses exploit digital technology. whether this be big businesses or small and medium enterprises. An economy like Kenya is powered largely through small and medium enterprises, and a lot of these enterprises are run by women. So there was then a focus that in the operations, in the strategy, and in the marketing, that there would be encouragement for local businesses, particularly in rural areas and underserved areas, to adopt use of ICTs. This obviously then leads to a focus, a growing focus on inclusiveness. And the COVID pandemic has just been the chief technology officer that we all have been waiting for, because you don't need to explain too much today about the role, the enabling role of the internet in driving business, in driving commerce, education, and so many other services that are now riding on the ICT platforms. So the National Broadband Strategy, in short, seeks to ensure equitable and sustainable development, because we do recognize now that in order to bridge the gap of exclusion, you have to look broadly across special groups like youth, women, persons with disabilities, minorities, and even people who live in marginalized areas. One of the initiatives that we have developed to ensure this is to put in initiatives for STEM, the science and technology programs, and also capacity building programs for women to acquire digital skills in collaboration with other stakeholders, so that it would afford women equal opportunities. So that's the National Broadband Strategy for Kenya 2018 to 2023. This is complemented by the Digital Economy Blueprint, which I would also say is yet another broad policy framework that seeks to improve ability to leapfrog economic growth for Kenya and for Africa. This strategy is also applicable across the African continent, and it recognizes that the digital economy does offer new and unique job opportunities for youth, women, small and medium enterprises. And SMEs are recognized that they will exist at the center of the digital transformation process. And as a result of that, there are a lot of digital entrepreneurial programs that exist and campaigns to promote this new ecosystem for SMEs, including the issue of financial inclusion, which has been used to really broaden the issue of digital finance across the board to enable grow enterprises. So I'll stop there from a strategy perspective and go straight into the regulatory tools that we have put in place to break down or unpack these policy aspirations for benefit of SMEs and women, and indicate that the Universal Service Fund is one of those kind of initiatives which seeks to bridge the gap to ensure that connectivity, internet access is not only available, it's accessible and it's affordable. And yesterday was just a brilliant opportunity for me to see what can happen when people experience signal and access internet for the first time, because I was surprised. You know, women have come together in small groups, and they're showing you about the boxes they have opened on Facebook, and they were posting honey, because in this area they sell honey, and they were posting honey, and so we bought honey off Facebook while standing there, and this was just absolutely beautiful. And I'm looking forward to see what this will mean as the months roll by. The other initiatives that we have put in is to ensure that we continue revising the ICT-related law in order to promote trust and confidence online. And through this, we have a very robust cybersecurity program that seeks to ensure that the internet space is safe and to deal with detection and deterrence of offenses that would be committed online. In November last year, the Data Protection Act was enacted, which will now step in to safeguard data and the privacy issues that come with that. We are also in the advanced stages of rolling out a national addressing system, which will serve very many purposes, one of them being the promotion of e-commerce, because without a proper, robust addressing system, then e-commerce is limited. It is very, very constrained. And so we are very excited by the rolling out of a national addressing system to boost e-commerce, to boost security, and to make people and properties and residences identifiable. We are also working towards a launch of the National Public Key Infrastructure, which will allow for digital transactions and really streamline authentication of online contracts. And I believe the biggest beneficiaries of this will be the small and medium enterprises, because it then allows a cheaper platform that is an equalizer, which businesses can access and be able to do business across the world. We also are going to be launching an e-readiness study. I believe my colleague Rishabh will speak to it in a bit more detail to evaluate how responsive is our policy and regulatory platform in Kenya. The reason for this is because we recognize, while it is okay to have policy and regulatory frameworks as an anchor for development of businesses, and indeed the past panel spoke to that, we do recognize that it's a balancing act and the need to stop and pause and reflect and ask how relevant are the policy and regulatory requirements we put in? How sensitive are these regulatory requirements across the board for big businesses, for small businesses, for businesses that are run by women? And this way you identify the barriers, you identify what interventions can be put in place in order to make it happen. So I will close there. I believe I'm just about on time, and welcome any questions that would arise out of this. Thank you very much.
Mercy, we're doing so well on time. Everybody's been almost perfect to the time. I was not going to stop you at all because I love to hear you talk about what you're doing. That said, well, we won't then cheat Rishabh at all. I know Rishabh's work has, for some time, has been very interesting, and what he's doing right now, a lot of governments are very excited to have him work on these studies that they do. Let me just hand the floor over to Rishabh now.
Thank you, Lee. Before I begin, I just want to share my screen, and I would need confirmation that you can see the screen at the moment. Is the screen visible?
Yeah, I can see it, but you need to do full screen now.
Just a minute, please.
Just how you would normally do
Yes.
Not, yeah.
Is it available?
Perfect.
Can it be seen? All right, perfect. So before I begin, thank you first of all, Mercy, for that really informative presentation, enriching presentation about the tapestry of ICT policy in Kenya. My comments, of course, will be more general and more generally applicable to e-commerce and internet governance from the point of view of the regulatory framework. So when choosing a policy governance model, it would be important to keep in mind that such a model needs to fit the requirement of a country. For instance, within the context of a developing economy or an LDC, this would entail being aware of the uneven levels of institutional maturity, but also the technical capacity. The idea, therefore, is to establish a context-specific approach to developing governance frameworks for the internet or for e-commerce. At present, there are a couple of general challenges that we currently note are being faced, particularly with regard to LDCs, but also across the world. The first of which is lack of trust. Lack of a sound legal and regulatory framework creates this environment of mistrust and fear of being scammed amongst users. In several countries, lacking laws that are necessary to ensure the correct functioning of e-commerce related services results in perpetuating this trust deficit that we have. And in fact, even in countries where appropriate regulations have actually been introduced, The implementation may be a challenge. For example, in a study that had been undertaken by UNCTAD in 2019, in an e-trade readiness assessment for Malawi, it was noted that Malawi's digital economy could not afford a national certification authority for digital signatures. So there can be various reasons for which implementation might be a challenge. The second issue is dated legislation. Lack of up-to-date legal frameworks on e-commerce or internet governance affects the ability of developing and LDC countries to engage with global businesses, or in fact, even attract foreign investors. This would, of course, result in a decline in domestic uptake of e-commerce. For instance, many of the laws that relating to privacy, which is such an important aspect of e-commerce and the internet in general, actually date back to the 1980s, which is prior to the internet. And therefore, many of these laws do not contain the nuance that is required to deal with the issues pertaining to e-commerce on many of the occasions. Another important issue is the lack of awareness amongst policymakers on global developments. It may very well be likely that policymakers are unaware of international agreements, be it perhaps in the WTO, or a digital agreement, a digital partnership agreement, or in fact, even the development of soft norms in internet governance forums. And this lacking of information might percolate into policy, which will do a disservice to that country's policy in general. The fourth issue is regulatory and institutional coordination remains a challenge. For example, in many countries, there is a Ministry of Technology or a Ministry of ICT that works in the technical aspects of ICT policy making in general, but they require close coordination with other ministries, prominent amongst which are the Ministries of Commerce and the Ministry of Finance. Often important aspects of regulatory developments are diluted due to lack of coordination amongst these ministries and other agencies. And last, of course, is the low level of awareness by the private sector and consumers, who are very important stakeholders in this discussion about the existing legal framework that exists. But with that being said, there are certain frameworks that can contribute to building trust and gaining equitable solutions. The first of which is essential regulation. Tools like e-documents and e-signatures require regulation that provide them with legal recognition or a legal sanctity of sorts. Lack of electronic signatures may require that party to actually physically travel to that place or ship a hard copy to sign only a document. This results in increasing in time and cost of the transaction. And needless to say, both e-documents and e-signatures are actually a very integral part of the global value chain and the importance of doing business today. The second kind of regulation is regulation that enhances trust. Now, consumers typically have no face-to-face contact with vendors anymore. This leads to fewer visual cues, such as location, facilities, and personalized interactions that generally help a consumer gauge the supplier's sense of professionalism. In this environment, when a consumer is asked to disclose sensitive personal information to a retailer, to an online intermediary, or in fact, even a digital platform, a sense of that trust is very likely to depreciate. In that regard, it becomes an even greater challenge for countries that are still in their nascency when using the internet. In light of this, there are 4 sets of regulations that are particularly relevant to promoting consumers' trust in digital markets. The first of which is consumer protection. An effective framework for online consumer protection helps consumers be better informed of the characteristics of the goods and services that they are purchasing, but also know about the terms of the transaction. In fact, consumer protection rules today are often quite broad and include all kinds of transactions and not just e-commerce transactions. And in fact, it is only the most modern framework of consumer protection that actually address specific issues that relate to e-commerce and issues relating to the internet. The second issue is with regard to cybersecurity. Our cybersecurity framework further improves trust by ensuring that firms meet certain minimum technical standards in protecting their digital identities. The third is on data governance. As consumers are required to provide personal, sensitive information and financial details, a strong data governance regime is likely to be essential to give individuals control over their information. And lastly, cybercrimes law. It's always better to have a situation where a penal provision is in existence that can deter malicious activity of criminal intent online. And the last kind of regulation is regulation that promotes e-commerce. An enabling environment also entails rules oriented to enabling a set of services or activities that are essential to the functioning of e-commerce in general, of which one is e-payments, but then we also have trade and customs. And of course, e-commerce logistics requires an enabling regulatory framework that permits integration with global providers and suppliers across the world. This, of course, would mean clear regulations on customs clearance, transport and last mile delivery conditions for e-commerce packages. And we also have issues with regard to intellectual property. Regulations relating to intellectual property, in particular those focused on intermediary liability, as well as the fair use of intellectual property, are now gaining traction in the discourse on e-commerce regulations. Now we have a situation here where regulations on e-commerce, including data governance and liability for e-commerce platforms, have so far progressed in many countries across the world, but more so in countries with a stronger digital sector. Now, UNCTAD has a cyber law tracker, where you have this data available in front of you, which goes to show e-transaction laws that are available across the world. But with that being said, there are certain points that we must recall irrespective. The first is that comprehensive regulatory frameworks for digital markets still remain elusive and are found mostly in developed economies. Secondly, if we look closely at domestic regulations across the world, they seem to suggest that it does not necessarily be indicative of the soundness of the country's regulation. In other words, just having cyber laws in place is not dispositive of a strong framework. How it is being implemented is also an important aspect. The third is having an essential aspect of e-commerce regulation, such as intermediary liability or data governance, but these are still quite new and require trial and error experimentations over the course of the next few years. But lastly, other aspects of e-commerce have been pioneered by high-income countries. These countries can support regulations with a vast and skilled institutional apparatus. Whether these rules are suitable to smaller countries, be they LDC or developing economies, still remains uncertain. So though we have a situation where you have rules on e-commerce, how they interact with each other is actually a very important aspect when we're talking about regulatory governance.
So Rishabh, thank you very much. Your work is very challenging, and the e-readiness reports I've read where there's a lot of work to be done. Sometimes the report makes it look like an extremely daunting task, but other governments seem to have a little more a matter of tweaking, it would seem. But I think your work is very much in demand and very appreciated. I thought that what we would do is turn for comments on the regulatory frameworks to first our private sector people, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I have a couple of questions from my own. We'll launch into those as soon as we have had our commentary by that. And for this, I would like to introduce Daniel first, if he has any comments on what he's heard about the regulatory frameworks.
Oh, yeah, I think one of the strategy also we have to propose an efficient regulatory framework is also to see what could be the linkages of the specific regulatory framework of this sector with the one of the other sectors. I'm thinking that if we consider that access to internet, access to communication tool is a basic right, like access to water, access to sanitation, access to health, or any other access to finance to produce, for small farmer to produce on his land. If we replace this question of the regulatory framework within the similar question for other vertical sector, I think that will be very useful for us to figure out how we can push this regulatory framework in a direction which can create value also in these sectors. Because I'm sure that by creating value in this particular sector is a way today to promote and to develop the access to the connectivity, to finance this access in the customer infrastructure, and to bring investors, private and public investors, to work together in pushing this more easily with less friction than we can see today on this sector. That's the point I would like to say, not to stay in our own environment and try to figure out how we can establish these linkages so that we have a strong content for the regulatory framework of this specific sector.
Thank you, Danielle. And let me turn now to Cici de la Pena for her commentary, and then we will start questions as soon as she and Claire have made some comments. Cici?
Thank you, Lee. And just let me highlight a very interesting presentations by both Mercy and Rishabh. And I basically want to make a comment regarding something that the two of them mentioned in terms of regulatory. And one of the questions that is there from the participants. Mercy mentioned that internet now is the means of driving businesses. And then Rishabh moved on to describe or provide a very, very good analysis on how this regulatory governance framework should be understood or should be worked and understood in order to make this happen. In addition to that, the question from the audience mentioned something about whether the regulatory frameworks include some human rights perspectives. And in this sense, I really want to highlight, probably from an experience, I would like to link all these three comments from these three individuals. It is very important to make this regulatory framework to happen in the right way. One of the examples I want to put across that really could open this debate is that is really, if we don't do it right, the regulatory framework, if we don't do it right, we can really go against human rights. And one of the things has happened in Latin America, particularly in Mexico, for example, is that in this hunger to set up a regulatory framework, in this case was for the VAT tax regulatory framework, the government of Mexico has passed a law that says that for those who cannot comply with all the regulatory framework in the tax VAT compliance, that is very restricted, the companies, the digital companies, are going to be disconnected from internet. And there is that regulatory framework is where the human rights attempt to freedom of speech and other human rights are compromised. So we could understand that the government want to have a mean to try to collect more taxes, but in this sense, in being them or giving themselves these attributions to connect or disconnect internet platforms as they wish, then we are having a high risk of attempting against human rights and freedom of speech. And this is something that we really need to bear in mind, particularly given the governance of internet, something that this shouldn't happen. We know that the governance of the internet is on a multi-sector basis, and if governments start doing this uh, because of an argument based on a tax framework or any other education or privacy framework, we are really risking the compromise of human rights. So that was the comment I would really wanted to highlight. And thank you very much for the opportunity to highlight this, and very interesting thoughts on this in these presentations.
Thank you, Cici. Let me turn to Claire now.
Great, thanks. Yeah, again, I agree, very useful, very interesting discussion. So I think some of the things I took out of it, which I think came from both the presentations and I really agree with, is that we need to really take a kind of data-driven approach and really understand what are the specific barriers that are and challenges in each country, and I think we heard that from Shab, and then I think also it was great to hear, when looking at which segments one needs to focus on and prioritize. We heard from Kenya, women, people with disabilities. That was great. I think it also came out quite strongly, and I also completely agree that we need to take a holistic approach. So I think, in Shab's presentation, he was talking about tax on the effect on businesses, but we also need to think about these things in respect to the actual users, not just the businesses, but the individuals who are maybe creating a business or users of the business. So things like tax also have a huge impact on affordability of digital services by the people the businesses are trying to reach, or those who might be trying to set up a business. So I think it needs to be looked at both from a business perspective as well as the impact of some of these issues on users. And as I mentioned earlier when I was talking, I think for our data shows that it's affordability and digital skills are two critical barriers. So anything that can be done from policy and regulatory perspective to address those two barriers is really important. I think we also need a policy and regulatory framework that encourages investment, supports innovation, and really just helps to address some of these barriers. So I would say I agree with what's been said earlier about needing to think about this holistically and across the different sectors, and to really focus on some of these key barriers and key issues that we need to address.
Thank you, Claire. It really is a big interrelationship between these two topics, it would seem. I know we have one outstanding question on human rights, which Cici addressed. Just before I asked the other panel if they have anything to observe about the human rights aspect of digital regulation, let me ask a more specific question because I know some of the people we have here have been thinking of it. Much of the developing countries access internet over their mobile phones. And so the question is, there's a lot of talk now about 5G coming on. I think it's going to be slower to come on in the lesser developed countries. How critical will 5G be for SMEs in the developing world to take part in more in the digital economy, since it would appear that might be a more ideal way for them to access more sophisticated internet services over their phone? Do we have any takers on that?
I'm happy to jump in on 5G.
Yes,
Claire, I'm sure other people. Yeah, I would. I'm sure others will have it. I mean, I think so. From my perspective, so where I work in GSMA, we focus on low and middle income countries. So really looking at some of those regions, and 5G. So from that perspective, 5G is a bit of a way off, but I think what we need to do is enable that development to happen, but at the same time recognize that in the countries where we work, or certainly where I work in Africa and Asia, it's really 3G that's and sometimes 4G that people are accessing. So and increasingly 4G. So to not forget that people have that, but at the same time enable that progression to 5G and to not halt that. So, but also recognizing what is the reality of what people are accessing and the different to kind of not forget that aspect as well, certainly in the countries that we work in, but I'm sure others have some comments as well.
Well, I know that I had spoken in sort of a preparatory conversation with Danielle about the question of 5G. Danielle, did you want to say anything?
No, I will be very brief. I think if I have $100 to put some 5G today, or I'm in Africa, so I'm talking for what I can see in Africa. If I have $100 to put on 5G, to invest on 5G, or to invest on developing applications or services, solutions which can improve the well-being or the economic performance of our small and medium enterprise, I would put my money on the application and the solutions. So I think the challenge we have today is to be able to demonstrate that we can create that value with the existing communication system we have. And again, in terms of priority, I do think that this is the way where we have to invest in another kind of technology or communication channel.
Thank you, Daniel. I mean, it's going to be affordable even when it becomes available anytime soon.
Yeah, but I'm talking in terms of priority. I didn't say no, but I think, yesterday, 2 days ago, we had a program or 1 week ago, we had a program in Senegal. We just discovered that almost 500 young people died trying to cross the sea to Europe on small boats. And my question was, can we offer something, make our country interesting for these young people and let them doing business, give them opportunity to do business in our country. So the question is, if I have to invest again, will I invest in a new technology like the 5G, or will I invest to create jobs for these youths? Recently, we launched an academy to develop a small and micro enterprises specialized in providing extension services to smaller farmers, and where we could use the community. Can we develop this kind of business, or are we going to wait on 5G to doing it? So that's the questions that we already have, because in Africa we are not in a continuum of growth of development that you can see in Europe. We are doing jumps. So maybe we will not have the 5G. We will have another thing, but again, the major priority right now is to create this economic environment, this development for all the communities in our continent. And I do think it requires that we develop applications, we develop services, we develop solutions for all these people and all these communities.
Could I say something?
Sure, please.
I'd like to look at the 5G conversation as one end of the spectrum, and at the other end, look at aspects of basic connectivity that we all very much need within broad populations, because 5G and the capabilities that it brings will power certain niche use cases. For which they will support models for small and medium enterprises as well as big businesses. And there's a place for that. At the same time, the connectivity conversation carries on, because 5G will not feed that part of the spectrum. So I would want to view this as a complementary, serving different population segments and serving different needs, because looking at our national space where we are quite big on innovation, there is a space for 5G. But at the same time, we also do participate in conversations around universality because we haven't closed the gaps at 100%. If we could view the two as separate and complementary, perhaps it might just give space for both conversations to develop in parallel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, all three of you. I've actually been hearing one that 5G is being sold to the consumer as something they can see more fancy videos and play games on. But I'm beginning to hear people say, don't forget that 5G will have an incredible number of sophisticated business applications. So you wonder if the goalpost is always getting higher with things like that. So seeing that capacity has been cheap enough that it is actually an alternative now in rural areas. But we have a few minutes left, and I think what is interesting is to, if anybody has a quick comment to make about the human rights and SDG questions, I would only say that SDGs, it's integrated into just about everything that all does, sometimes whether we know it or not. So if anybody has comments left on human rights, I'm fine. Other than that, I'd like to go to the conclusion section. No? Well, listen, one thing I thought would be interesting, because we had agreed with IGF, we'd have some kind of an output, is to ask you if you could make one or two only recommendations of something that really needs to be done, either by governments or other stakeholders or even by the private sector itself. What would your one or two recommendations be? And I know that's limiting you to a very few and a vast field of work that needs to be done. But let me go in the order in which we originally were talking and ask you to come up with what you think might be one or two key recommendations for what needs to be done to improve, connectivity and participation by developing countries and their SMEs in the digital economy. I'll start with, if we go in the order we originally planned, one, I'd start with Danielle.
Yeah, there is so much to do, but really again, I really think that at least for African countries, find a way to support more efficiently the innovation in our continent, brought by African companies, African SMEs, African technology, digital company, service provider. I do think it's something we can work on. But again, I'm coming again to my point is that if we can replace these connectivity issues or within our main area of developments for our continent, which are again agriculture, which are water access, which are access to sanitation. If we can take that kind of access to school, if we can access to healthcare, if we can figure out how we can use these technologies and see what we can bring to accelerate the transformation of these sectors for our continents using the technology that we want to bring, I think that will be something which will be very tremendous leverage of investment for our countries, particularly in Africa. That's my point. Bringing more solution, creating an environment that will help people to take benefit of what we already have will be something which will support that development for sure.
Thank you, Danielle. Cici?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to be very brief, and I just think that something that mentioned Risha is very important. Regulatory and institutional coordination that consider not only the economic aspect, but also the human rights aspect of it, and how an excessive regulatory barrier could either diminish the development of e-commerce and digital economy among small enterprises, and also could diminish or could be attempting against freedom of speech and human rights. That's basically what I would like to highlight.
Thank you, Cece. And now we'll go to Claire.
Great. As I said, other people said, there's a lot to be discussed or said, but I'm a huge believer in data-driven, evidence-based approaches. And if you don't understand the issues and challenges, you can't address them. So I guess if I was to have to pick one thing, I would say to really get on top of the data, understand the challenges and issues in the specific markets, and then take concrete, specific, measurable action to address them. And then I'll sneak in a kind of second point, which is I think it also needs a collective and collaborative effort by all stakeholders. I don't think any one stakeholder can address this. So, but yeah, my main point would be really just to understand and take a data-driven, evidence-based approach. Otherwise, we are going to leave, as what Cece said, leave people behind. We're going to, from a human rights or an inclusion perspective, it's just not going to work. So we need to have that strong focus and lens into what we're doing.
Thanks, Claire. So I guess we need AI to regulate.
No, I think you need to talk. I think it's about talking to the businesses and the individuals. It's about understanding from them, not using necessarily supply side data. I think we need to speak to those who are being excluded and who have the challenges, and really understand how to focus our efforts. So
let me ask the Mercy to give her recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. I think going to Claire's point, this conversation really speaks to the need to really undertake impact assessments on policy and regulatory tools that have been put in place, so that we are able to evaluate with a measure of precision on what the user experience is across the board: big businesses, small businesses, businesses set up for special groups, youth, women, persons with disabilities, so that this way we're able to ensure that as much as possible, the regulatory tools and the regulatory profiles we have, that they are actually achieving the intended purpose for which they were meant for in the first place. I take the view that we can no longer assume a neutral approach for policy and regulation and assume that it applies the same for all. And because of that is then the need to actually be very specific and evaluate, because with the pandemic, internet has really assumed a utility value, what has been referred to on this platform as a human rights perspective, and hence the need to identify if there are any barriers, any constraints being experienced by certain groups, then there is a measure of urgency to overcome those barriers to ensure equal participation.
Thank you, Mercy. You're getting accolades in the comments section. Let me turn now to Rishab. We are just about on time.
Thank you, Lee. I think a good starting point from a national perspective would be to carry out the legal and regulatory assessment of where things stand and compare it to where you want yourself to be in the next 5 years or so. The second would be to adopt a baseline e-commerce legislation or to update relevant laws and regulations. We could also strengthen business and civil society engagements to foster e-commerce enabling environment. But lastly, increase awareness of e-commerce regulations, including issues such as data localization, data protection, cross-border data flows across MSMEs, but also other relevant stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Rishab. I think these are all sort of parts of the same thing, and I know it was a difficult question. Let me use my last 2 minutes to turn to the audience. We have time for 1 or 2 people in the audience. If you could make one recommendation, what would it be on these issues we've been talking about? Anybody from the audience? Is there a hand raise function here somewhere? We've got Evgenia. Hold on. I have just turned you on, Evgenia.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Well, I would really appreciate the fact that you've discussed human rights so much. So thank you for bringing my question into the order. And if I just need, if I have 1 second to make a recommendation, I would say that the broad stakeholder engagement, I think, is key, because when we talk about human rights, especially, there are some capacities that are not necessarily present within the private sector or public sector always in terms of expertise. Whereas there's a huge community that has a lot of expertise, which we are happy to share. So the broad stakeholder engagement, I think, would be very much appreciated.
Okay, anybody else in the audience? I see Arthur. Let me allow you. I've just turned you on, Arthur. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Lee, for giving me the floor. I would like to thank all of the panelists for the full presentation. What I would like to say is we need more collaboration between government, law enforcement, businesses, civil society, and technical community in order to implement a successful economic development initiative for the benefits of our continent. And such outcome for me will be tangible when all the stakeholders work closely together. That is my my final word and recommendation for this session. Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Arthur. And I think that's very appropriate point on for us to end, because that's what IGF is really all about, is bringing stakeholders together on internet and digital issues. I would like to sincerely thank the panelists for being so articulate and so thoughtful on the various topics we've discussed, and thank all of the participants as well for sticking with us and being so interactive to let us know how things are going, technically and otherwise. And I would also like to thank my co-organizers, Agatha and Kian, for keeping us honest. I really look forward to working with all of you in the future, and anybody who is the participants, the attendees here. I'm really happy if you have any other questions to get in touch with me or any of the others of us. I know that we're aware of people who are putting together regulatory impact assessment tools. The WTO, within its very small niche, does a lot of technical assistance in country and within regions on a lot of these digital and e-commerce issues. So I think I can speak for all of us when we certainly would be happy to have people follow up with us on and continue this discussion. So I'd like to say thank you. It's now 5:02, so we're 2 minutes over. But I'd like to say again, thank you to everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.